everybody. Welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's Francis, and I'm here with Taylor Zients. Taylor reached out to me because he claims to be an expert in deep sea submersibles, deep sea diving, the salvage operations, things like that. And of course, if you're listening to this now, we obviously just had a deep sea submersible mishap that happened not too long ago. So, Taylor, thank you for coming on. Give me some of your background though. What have you worked on? What makes you so smart with submersibles?
Yeah, so I've had an interesting career that in certain points have involved some of these deep sea diving submersibles. My family got involved with deep sea. I mean, bluntly, deep sea treasure hunting back in the late '90s, and starting with an effort to find and recover gold from a Japanese submarine that was lost in the Atlantic Ocean while on the gold for tech trade with Germany during World War II.
Huh. That's so there was a submarine just laden with gold and then it sank.
Well, I mean, we torpedoed it. We broke the codes, tracked it down, and took it out with what at the time was one of the most sophisticated and secret weapon systems that we deployed at sea. But
okay, yeah. That makes more sense. But yeah, I mean, it's World War II. God, there's so much shit going on.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So how do you get it? Like, how does your family get into something like this? Like, somebody's just like, oh, like, I mean, I imagine there's some kind of history to your family and the ocean, because it's not exactly a hey, let's all get into the dinghy and go drop something down 3,000 feet and see what we can dredge up. Like, you've got to have resources, you've got to have time, you've got to have expertise. So where does all that come from?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it was maybe a little bit closer to that than you might think. So yeah, my father was an attorney for a long time, and he was just kind of increasingly dissatisfied with it, and decided just almost by happenstance, he met some people that were involved in deep sea search and salvage operations, and he was able to provide the business side of it with some insight. How do you form companies? How do you how do you put together logistics and things like that? And he just, eventually became a project manager for a number of expeditions, and he brought myself and my younger brother along for the ride. It really ended up changing our lives, and now I spend a lot of my career. I tended to gravitate towards the history side of things, so I became a research historian and contributed to the discovery of a number of shipwrecks.
Cool. So, so you do the book learning part of it, but do you also go down sometimes and do the actual submersion and checking it out, or you kind of leave that to other people?
Yeah, I've had a chance to do that a few times. So, first ever big expedition I took was a Titanic expedition in the year 2000. Totally different technology set than this recent OceanGate tragedy here. But and then since then, the next expedition I went out with was to a target in the Bermuda Triangle. I actually got to dive that one. It was about a mile deeper than the Titanic, and then ended up focusing my career on this, working as a historian, working for a private salvage company. Spent more time in archives and libraries than at sea, but but at that point we were mostly using robotics systems. It's a lot of that kind of technology evolved away from manned systems.
Right, and that is kind of a question that I have about, like, I understand the human drive to explore. People want to climb Mount Everest, people want to dive to the Titanic, or even deeper, as you have done. But like, at this point, it's just like, chucking stuff into space. Like, why would we send a person there other than to, like, put a boot print there? We have robots, and if a robot dies, it's kind of sad, but it's not like a tragedy. It's like, oh, the robot no longer works, we'll just send another robot. So it sounds like, is the submersible work that you and your companies do now, is it mostly robotic, or is there still manned missions down?
There's still manned programs, but I would say a lot of the successful innovation is really happening on the robotics side. When I started, we used things like thermal paper to print out deep sea mapping type stuff. Now it's the amount that computers can do is phenomenal. What artificial intelligence can do with letting these robots, steer themselves and make decisions at depth, it's pretty incredible. So, if you were to back really, really far away, do you need to have a manned program that does any of these things? I think the answer would probably be a pretty clear no.
But
Yeah.
and I know like James Cameron goes down all the time. James Cameron is just weird though. Like he made the Titanic movie. It seems like he's really into that. But like also James Cameron, like if you watched like any of his documentaries, it seems like he really puts a lot of like, hey, I don't want to die down here. So I'm going to spend a lot of time and effort making sure that if I'm going to go down there personally, that I'm going to be okay. Um, so, and you also mentioned that you've dove further than the Titanic. So, how many, I guess, of these manned submersibles are there out there? Like, between, I guess, I mean, they're all private, right? There's not really any public, any government deep sea submersibles that visit things like the Titanic, or are there?
Yeah, there's still a few. China and Japan both have their own submersibles. That they study fisheries, they dive deep, scientific research only. Woods Hole has Alvin, which they've recently refurbished. It's their long-standing system that still works. They can go deeper than ever now. France has a system. I'd say probably less than 10.
That can do Titanic depth. Like, I imagine it's a lot easier to create a submersible that can explore like the continental shelves that go down 30, 40, 50 feet or so.
Yeah,
It's the deep sea stuff that's really hard to do.
that's completely right. Like I'm not talking about like the the Atlanta submarine you can go into off of Maui or something like that, right? It's like the Titanic is at kind of the average ocean depth at about 12,500 feet. It really, half the ocean is actually a lot deeper than that. So it really is a handful of manned systems and then a number of robotic systems that can reach those depths.
What is it about the Titanic? I mean, that's the shipwreck that we always hear about. But and I there maybe James Cameron romanticized it a little bit with the movie Titanic, but it seems like that shipwreck specifically has a big draw to it, even though there's apparently Japanese submarines full of gold. So what is it about? Because you've been to the Titanic, so what was it about that trip that made you say, "Yes, I want to go and see this wreck specifically"?
Yeah, yeah, and I do have a small caveat here. I went on the expedition of the Titanic. That was not the dive that I
Okay.
took. My father did take that dive, but it's kind of hard to put into words. Like on one hand, the type of cameras and mapping that we've put down on the Titanic are better than a human eye could ever capture it. The technology has just exceeded a human being's capability to see the wreck. That being said, I can tell you from my dive, it's like visiting an alien world at depth. You see animals that you would never even know existed in a lot of cases. It's, I'm here. Let me tell you just a quick story. When I dove, it was on a shipwreck from probably the early 1800s. We were investigating kind of a target that was found out there for an unrelated search. And so we're looking around on the ocean bottom trying to find it. And we come across the shipwreck. It just kind of like rises out of the darkness as our lights fall on it, as we're looking out of like 3-inch wide portal viewers. And one of the first things I notice about it is that a aluminum Coke can had rolled partially underneath the hole. So somebody on the surface had finished their Coke, thrown it overboard. It fell 3 miles and hit a shipwreck. And
That's like a recent Coke.
yeah, absolutely. It was probably within the last 10 years of that dive. It was probably somebody drank in the 90s and threw it overboard. But we were pretty far from the shipping routes and things like that. We were really alone out there. It's 3 miles deep. It's in the middle of nowhere. I can't walk away from an experience like that without having a deeper understanding of the way that we have changed the world around us as people.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't have an experience like that without it really changing how you live your life and view the world. And I'm
Yeah,
not.
not to keep bringing Cameron up,
Yeah.
but I know that didn't he go to the Marianas Trench and find a plastic bag?
Yep. Yeah. That he
Yeah.
did, and that I think that affected him. It's I know he kind of gets made fun of on South Park and that kind of thing, but like if you kind of dig into his approach to some of these things, it's a little harder to criticize. The guy just he put a decade into that expedition.
hmm and I know like also really like deep sea diving in a way is important. Like the ocean covers 70% of the earth. It's very important that we understand it. And as you said, like you go down there and it's a complete alien world. Like if I remember my daughter's Magic School Bus books correctly, even the vents that are down there, we didn't discover those until like 50 years ago or so, right? Like the vents that just have like life that lives around it because it's venting superheated bacteria.
Yeah, I believe early '80s, but that we didn't know that life could exist without. I believe it was without oxygen at that point. It just fundamentally changed everything that we knew about the origin of life.
So let's kind of talk about submersibles, submarines, really anything that we strap some dudes in and toss it into the water. Um, and the submarine, for those of you who might not have a whole lot of background in it, the original submarine was a Confederate States of America invention that killed more rebels than it did Union people. Basically, it was an underwater thing that they put a bomb on the front of it, and they said, "Ram those guys, and it'll explode." And it ended up, killing the people inside of it more often than it killed anybody else. So 100 and 60, 170 years beyond that, now we have nuclear powered submarines. We have these submersibles. What's the difference between a submarine and a submersible?
Yeah, if I was to get just really really simple about it, it's submarines go horizontally and submersibles go vertically. So
Okay,
yeah, even your deepest diving U.S. Navy submarines are not going to be going
they
terribly
don't go
deep.
nose down.
Yeah, whereas submersibles cannot go very far, but they're designed to go to depth.
So is that really the main? You've got one that is meant to drop and one that's not.
Yeah, yeah, or at least not drop terribly far. I mean, we're kind of talking about
Right.
orders of magnitude here, right?
So if you did manage to make a submarine that could withstand those kinds of depths, it would still take forever to get down there because it's a horizontal. Can't go nose up, so it doesn't really have that frictionless drop that you're looking for. I imagine.
It's they could. There's really nothing to keep them from hitting the bottom other than good seamanship, and not wanting to die. But there's just kind of like limited military utility to sinking a submarine past a certain point.
Yeah, you need it to get as low as the other guys, maybe a little bit lower to go underneath them, but
Yeah.
beyond that, not a whole lot of use for combing the bottom. So what other kind of shipwrecks are people out there looking for currently? Like we've got how many more Japanese subs are full of gold and where are they?
Having worked in the treasure hunting industry for a lot of years, I personally believe it's an industry with less future than it has past. There's still finds from time to time. There's still like big World War II silver shipments that are being discovered. There's a really famous one off of like a Spanish galleon off of Brazil that's been under a legal fight since the 1980s. But when they bring that up, it could easily be worth $1 billion. Over the last few years, I kind of feel like this is an area that has been taken over by billionaires. I think like Paul Allen might be one of the better examples of that. Microsoft co-founder, and what he spent some of the last years of his life doing was finding wrecks from World War II. So I think he found like the Indianapolis. He found a couple of very famous Japanese battleships, purely to just document them and to say they've been rediscovered and this is what they look like now. And it's a chance to kind of revisit some of that history.
Yeah, I do like. I will sometimes, say obviously somebody shouldn't do something as dumb as get into a tin can and go to the bottom of the ocean, but I know that it is done for the most part very safely. I imagine you wouldn't have gotten into one if you didn't feel like it was safe in its own way, and like it. Part of me just thinks, oh, obviously, the leftist inside of me thinks we shouldn't allow these billionaires to take over these things, but like also your average like government isn't going to do these things. Like when it comes to like the damage that a billionaire can do, puttering around the bottom of the ocean and finding shipwrecks and saying, "Look, I found it. Here it is," and mark it on the map is one of the least dangerous things that I imagine they can do. Um, so so now that it is kind of being taken over, I imagine because it just gets more and more costly to do these things, right? Like what's involved in the entire dive, like your dive that you did. Take me from Taylor says I have decided that I do want to go on this dive, and then what is the process that gets you to the bottom of the ocean?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely had an unusual kind of path there. It's definitely very unlike anybody that would have been on the OceanGate sub. Um, Also, just to be really frank, as someone without an engineering background, I'm probably not the best person to have a sophisticated understanding of the risks past a certain point, right? So, what I would say is like the OceanGate program, for instance. It kind of bugs me a little bit that most of the media dismissed the pilot as just the French pilot that was on board. It wasn't just some French pilot. His name was P.H. Nargelet, and he was one of the most experienced people on the planet doing this kind of work. The guy was an institution. He was incredibly well known in this community. But what a lot of people do is they look and say, are credible people involved with this? Are people that know what they're doing involved with this? And then they'll go along with it. But on the flip side, that's how Theranos fell apart, right? It's you have all these high flying board members, and people didn't have their eye on the ball for what was actually happening with the engineering. But to tell the story of how I got on board, there's a quick version here, which I'll go with. So back in the 90s, Discovery Channel worked with an undersea explorer to try to find Gus Grissom's lost space capsule off of California. He went up with Liberty Bell 7 in the 60s. It was a low Earth orbit shot. When he came down, the hatch blew as he was bobbing in the water. It wasn't supposed to do that. He barely got out alive. Even his spacesuit was starting to flood. There's an incredible picture of him getting dragged away from this sinking capsule like a cat getting dragged out of a bathtub, which is kind of funny when you think of that, just the glamour of space travel in that era. They tried to hook the capsule. It weighed too much. The cable broke. It went to the bottom. So the 90s, Discovery Channel goes to find it. They find it successfully. They bring it up. It's now in Kansas, I want to say. I always would love to see it, but I've never had an excuse to go to Kansas. So here's hoping. But
Well, if you do, it's not too far from me, so we'll check it out.
I'd like that. Yeah. So as part of the underwater sonar search for this lost space capsule, they come across a target. They take it to experts. They say, we can't tell you what it is, but what we can tell you is that it looks wooden and it looks old. And it just so happened that Gus Grissom came down over the old Spanish galleon routes. So an expedition was put together. If you've ever seen the movie Titanic, the big white ship in the very beginning with the two little submersibles, that's a real system. The crew's real. It's the ship's real. It's very, very much the real deal. So that ship was chartered on the heels of a Titanic expedition to go out and explore this target. We found it. It had some silver coins on board. It wasn't like a Spanish galleon bursting with doubloons, but hey, it's still really cool. And at the time, it was the deepest archaeological site on the planet. It was the deepest that anyone had ever kind of successfully brought an archaeologist to explore. And my dad took his dive. That was his kind of compensation for putting things together from like a logistical standpoint, since, just nobody had anybody to pay anything.
Mm-hmm.
This was so bootstrapped.
Which is really not how like I would think I'd want to do this, but apparently it worked. So how deep are we talking about here?
Yeah, I went down to 16,700 feet. It's roughly 3 miles.
Okay. That's still like, I don't like to get into the ocean beyond my knees. So like it's still way better than me. So
yeah.
So you've decided that there's credible people here who are working the thing. What, like, I imagine it's a small amount of people that can be on any of these things. So how many people were on your expedition? like the dive
Yeah,
expedition.
in our sub, it's two submersibles, which has a safety factor that the OceanGate system did not. Two means one can rescue the other, conceivably, if they're stranded, as opposed to imploded, of course. But three guys, 6 foot diameter steel sphere. So
Like you gotta make sure that like everything is emptied out. Like do a juice cleanse the night before you get on, just to make sure everybody else doesn't have to deal with you.
you're not wrong. It's we you don't eat the night before if you can avoid it, because yeah, I mean, like my mission lasted like 15 hours. It's a while to be down there. I mean, a lot of people have been down there a lot longer, but yeah, it's a long time, and basically three people sharing the front seat of a Volkswagen Bug.
I don't even like driving across the state like that, and I take breaks every hour or so. So what is the? I mean, you're a historian, so why were they taking you? I imagine that filling a seat on one of these things is kind of a big deal. So they're taking you down. Is this also kind of a compensation? Like, well, he's helping us out. We don't have any money for him. Do you want to go take a look at some stuff on the bottom of the ocean, or was this a no? We want you to come down. We need you to take a look and see things as they are down here to help with your investigatory work.
This kind of predated my career to a certain extent. I was 19 years old, still in college, no idea what I wanted to do with my life. It's my dad helped put together the whole expedition, and he was compensated with two dives, and he took the first and gave me the second.
And so well, that's cool. So just we have. Do you want to go down? And what is it that actually makes you want to go down? Because I'm afraid of drowning and being buried alive. So obviously, any of this is right off the map for you. What is it for you? I know you've talked about how it's kind of a completely alien world down there, but like 19, still trying to feel out what you want to do. Is this kind of the yes, this is what I'm going to do now? I'm going to be involved in deep water salvage, like kind of epiphany. Because again, there's no way you're screwing me into one of those things.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you and I are probably about the same age. I'm 41. I think you're probably close.
Yeah, I'm 40.
Yeah. The calculus at this age is very, very different than the calculus at 19. I mean, come
Yeah.
on. Like, it's like you say, you're not going to take me to do some dangerous things. Man, you've been in war zones. Like,
But yeah, at the age of 20, I was tooling around Afghanistan.
So, yeah.
So it just I guess it depends on what stupid danger are you comfortable with.
yeah, but like I grew up on Star Trek, The Next Generation. I'm also a giant Ben Sisko fan. In the chance to explore when it was put in front of me, I could not imagine saying no and looking in the mirror. So, and along the same lines, I hate to say this, and this sounds really, really suspect in retrospect, but if someone had invited me to go along with the OceanGate expedition two weeks ago, I would have had a very, very hard time saying no, given the people that were in it. Unless somebody privately warned me off that knew more than me, had an engineering perspective that I wouldn't have, you couldn't stop me. You couldn't stop me from going.
No, yeah, it's made dives before, right? It's made multiple successful dives.
Yeah, for
It
years.
wasn't like
Yeah.
maiden voyage, and now it's crushed. Like this was no, this is routine. We've done this plenty of times with this thing, but like it's been a while since we've had any kind of accident like this. Like maybe the Kursk was the last like major. Well, no, there was a submarine that went missing, an Indonesian submarine that went missing. I think not too long ago.
Yeah, and then there was one off of there was an Argentinian submarine. I knew somebody that was involved in that search. I was on the Russian expedition ship Keldysh when the Kursk went down. And we had to break away from our expedition partway through because we got a letter off of Putin's desk directly telling us that to break off what we were doing, and so that the Keldysh could go home essentially and assist with the operation.
Oh wow! So, and I know that at first they were recalling Russian ships. They didn't start recalling the American. They didn't start asking for help for anybody else for a while. So you were on a Russian ship that went. So what was that like? what is, I mean, what do you do in a situation like that when you're like when you're one of the ships? Like, because I'm at, like, as you said, you in Titanic, it's got the two. You like, oh, we lost one, we can drop down the other one to go get them. But like, and I guess this is a good way to go over into like search and rescue operations and things like that.
Yeah.
How does one search for something like this? Like, we didn't find the Titanic until what, the 80s, I think.
Yeah, I mean, supposedly the government knew where it was back in the 70s or so because of the Cold War technology that they couldn't talk about. So it was, but 80s technology and was very, very different. They basically just dragged a camera sled over the area and checked the pictures. Now we have completely independent systems that can map the ocean bottom by themselves, and when they hit a target, they can actually break away from their pre-programmed mission, go down, photograph it, and then leave. So it's more about having the right system in the right place at the right time. If they were stranded down there, and there was a system in place or a backup ROV or something like that, that would have been one thing. And you notice, like, as soon as within a few hours of the right system arriving in that area, they were able to find wreckage. But it just wasn't available prior to that.
Right. So I get in the Kursk disaster, that was 2000,
Yeah,
correct? So
yeah, that sounds right.
what was your ship doing? Like, I guess, what was your ship originally doing? Like, what was the original mission of this ship before it got pulled off? See, you mentioned Kursk, and now we're just going to talk about
Oh
that for
yeah,
the next half hour.
yeah, absolutely. So the Keldysh and the two Mir submersibles was originally developed to in kind of like this hybrid scientific military application. On the scientific side, it's the same type of thing that you'd imagine anywhere. It's fisheries, it's hydrothermal vents, it's exploration. Probably not really so much on the historical side as it was originally conceived by the Soviet Union.
Sure, just to go out and find stuff, kind of thing.
Yeah,
See what you can see.
absolutely. On the military side, it was a little bit kind of a clearer mission where their goal was to go down to the lost Russian nuclear submarines. The Russians lost a number of them, as well as potentially tap undersea cables and communications and things like that too.
How how do you get onto how do you personally get onto a Russian ship? Like, what was the job that got you there? Was it just we're hiring researchers, you happen to be one? Sure, I'll go work for, like, and this is not an accusation,
Yeah.
but like, sure, I'll go work for the Russian government to do this. I'll go work for whatever government wants to pay me to go tool around the bottom of the ocean and look at stuff.
Yeah. I mean, there's kind of two answers to that question. One was this kind of predated my career as a researcher, and I went along because my dad was a project manager for this, and the reason we were able to get on a Russian vessel was because it was available. It's once the Cold War ended, nobody was funding this vessel anymore. And in order to kind of keep up with their scientific mission and just to stay on the water, to keep their people paid and fed, they would take whatever work you threw their way, whether it was filming or treasure hunting or anything else, in order to just keep afloat. Like I'll give you an example of this. I'm pretty sure this was James Cameron's favorite submersible pilot. He, they drew these guys from ex-fighter pilots. These guys were phenomenal at what they did. They could hover in a current with this 30-ton submersible and use a manipulator arm to pick up a single coin the size of a quarter with a little tiny suction cup. That's the level of skill involved with what they were able to do with these subs. And when he wasn't doing this, he was driving cab in Moscow, as the story goes. So in order to kind of keep these incredibly bright, capable people working, they were taking charters, and sometimes those charters were tourist trips, and other times they're treasure hunting and or filming, like James Cameron did with Titanic. And yeah,
So this guy just happens to own a ship that does this, but also in the off season just has to kind of dock it somewhere and go drive a cab.
it wasn't only he didn't own the ship, the submersible. These were all state owned assets. They just were state owned assets that were no longer state funded assets.
That's what, like, I and I'm just like, it's taking me a minute to wrap my brain around like the idea that something is owned by the state but is hired can be hired out because the state, like, and that's just the Russians. Like, it's the Americans don't do that because we dump way too much money into our stuff, which is nice when you're the one who's underneath the big money funnel. But
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah, so it was just kind of a like, hey, you guys, I know you guys kind of run that ship. We'll hire you out. They signed it out from the Russian government. Like, yeah, we're gonna take this. We're gonna go on out here. They're gonna pay us X amount of dollars, and we're gonna come back.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't much of a choice there. If they weren't taking private charters, it would have dissolved. In fact, I'll give you a really good example of that. I was looking at some used deep water gear in like Biloxi or something like that. It's just somewhere along the Gulf Coast, and I just stumble across in the middle, like up on blocks. I have photos of it. This like Soviet era submersible just sitting there, and I'm like, what is this thing? Like, I've been on a different class before, but I'm looking at it and I'm pretty familiar, and I have no idea what this is. And it was kind of like one of those little research projects. I ended up identifying it because it was the Soviets did a series of commemorative stamps back in the day, and I was able to look at the picture and realize that, hey, this is the same sub.
Shit, I'm gonna have to see if there's any Soviet submersible pins that I have.
All right, yeah, hey, I'd take one.
Yeah, I'll let you know if I come across any.
But so here's what happened. They couldn't pay for the program anymore. They tried to bring it over to the United States, but the sub didn't come along. It came with the crew, and the crew are staying. And all of a sudden, like whoever was trying to fund it just vanished out of the whole situation. So you got a shipyard owner with a Russian sub that he can't do anything with, and a crew that are now living in his guest room in the attic. So, and no idea what he's supposed to do with any of this. And as the story goes, the crew doesn't even want to go home at this point. So, fast forward 30 plus years, and it's still there.
Where's the crew at? They're still in the attic.
I mean, they went home at some point, and hopefully they're doing well, right? But I think some government agency came by at some point and threw a sticker over the hatch so it couldn't be used as like some kind of, I don't know, like drug submersible or whatever. Not that it could possibly have ever been used for that, but
hey,
but yeah,
look,
it's if you
people knock together submarines to run drugs. Like, it's not,
some pretty
come
impressive
across
ones.
like, oh, look, one's already built for us.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's Soviet, so you don't want to get into it.
Yeah, but it's they that's what would have happened to the Merit system too if people in the private sector hadn't seen ways to use it and they hadn't said yes.
So let's talk about rescue operations.
Yeah.
So I know the Kursk wasn't down as far as that was at what was the depth of that one?
I want to say about 400 feet. So we're talking about
feet.
Just a completely different situation here.
Right. So, and I know There's Your Problem did a episode on the Kursk. So if you really want to get into the depressing nitty gritty about what happened there, but I have you on to talk about submersibles. So going down even further than that, and sure. So you've got some people, they bring a secondary along. We'll toss that in to bring them up if necessary. But what are some of the other rescue operations that one can do in a situation like this? And also what kind of I assume that you also believe that this was just a catastrophic implosion, correct? Of the OceanGate?
Yeah, and they made, look, I'm not an engineer, but they made so many experimental design choices that they're going to have to kind of figure out which one failed, because it looks in retrospect like there was potentially a number of different things that could have happened that would have caused this.
Yeah, I've watched the CEO's videos. There's a lot of we decided that we're going to do it anyway, and but again, this thing worked multiple times before, so there's not really any reason to believe it wasn't going to work. The fourth or fifth or 10th time that they were doing it.
Yeah, I would say yes, but part of the design choices was like a carbon fiber composite. And I'm not sure if there's really enough known out of what enough pressure and temperature cycles will do to that material, or if there's going to be, potentially undetectable degradation, at least with what they had on hand to test it.
So, what are submersibles generally made out of then, if not this carbon fiber?
The one that James Cameron took the Mariana Trench, that's made out of steel, and the one that the Russian used, that was nickel steel. So pretty well understood as far
Yeah, and
as
what's
materials go.
is the point? Yeah, is the point of going to carbon fiber? Is that like a cost? Is it a weight? Like, why change what we already know is working?
My understanding, it's kind of like all of the above. I think that it was a cost issue. I think it was a weight issue. Like, even looking at the design, that thing. I mean, everybody says it's small, but that thing is roomy. That thing is like
Yeah, you can fit multiple people, and I
yeah,
saw the one that James Cameron got in, and it's like it's a big tall thing that he has to be in the fetal position to be in, and
yeah.
it's just him.
At the time before this happened, as kind of a non-engineer, I looked at it and thought that's amazing, because it looked like a generational leap forward in what they were able to create. To yeah, it looked like a generational leap forward. In retrospect, obviously not the case, but
Well, would a design like that work with steel, or is because yes, I understand the big open. Everybody kind of makes fun of like it's just a big open tube on the inside, but that is massive amount of size because you don't want that much air inside of it. The more air that you're putting on the inside, the more I imagine the more chance for an implosion that you're going to get the deeper you go. So it did seem like a really big kind of, and you're not an engineer, but like you know doing something like this but out of steel, or is that we haven't done it out of steel because we know that doesn't work? We've tried that with steel with a void that large in the middle, and it always kind of does the same thing.
I've never seen a design like that for that depth. It's generally speaking, spherical is best. As like these submersibles dive, they actually shrink.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, I guess a ball shrinks in on itself
yes,
rather than
yeah,
like you have equal pressure pressing down on it rather than having angles and joints and things like that where there could be weaknesses.
yeah. That's my understanding. It's you've got distribution of pressure, which is going to be maybe less ideal, or there's going to be potentially some weaker spots or some parts that are going to have to take more stress than others.
So in something like this, say you want to if this was 2023 and you were out and you got the call, hey, you guys have to come help look for this on a ship that maybe like the one that went to find the Kursk. What exactly can just any ship do in a situation like this? Like, I imagine there has to be some kind of like, no, it's really far down there, we need special stuff that can go down and retrieve, or we need special things that can ping that far, or communicate that far. What is your average ship going to be able to do in this kind of situation?
Average ship can do a surface search only, and what that scenario would have demanded is that they were able to either finish or abort their dive, come up to the surface, but they had some kind of like catastrophic communications failure, and were not able to communicate, which means that they would have just been kind of bobbing along the surface. So your average ship can participate in a surface search, and that is really it. That's all they can do.
So you just kind of go around the top, see if anybody pops up. But so in the situation that we have here with OceanGate, what do you bring out to go search for this? Because they said they found debris. So does that mean that they were sending down robotic submersibles to go take a look at things? Were they sending people down? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, they had a robotic system out there, is my understanding, and they start doing a search with probably a combination of like forward-looking sonar and also just visual, looking for any kind of evidence. And so long as they have good tracking on that system, and they're not looking through the same area twice or missing areas, it's basically just they call it mowing the lawn. They go back and forth until they find it, and then they yeah. So that's how you find it down there. And my understanding is it was probably not terribly difficult to locate the wreckage.
Yeah, apparently it was right next to it. You just got to sort of like, no, that's new debris down there.
Yeah.
We've got to go. Yeah, I imagine they've mapped out a lot of the Titanic, but also ocean currents move and whatnot, so things probably shift around. But
Hmm.
uh, yeah, you go down and he's like, yep, there's the new stuff down there. But and that's they found the like the landing skid and they found the front end, but not the rest of it.
Yeah, they found the fiberglass tail cover, which basically just kind of went over the end. And yeah, they did find the landing gear to it too, or the skids. So which is just I mean, once I saw that it was I think that a number of people probably knew already that was my best guess using only kind of public information, but I mean that completely confirmed it in a second that they were gone. There's just no mistaking modern debris for anything that they would find from the Titanic either. It would stand out very clearly.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a difference of about 100, of more than 100 years at this
Yeah.
point. But like in, you know, what kind of scenarios are there where this, you mentioned like aborting and going back up to the surface, like, and I know it's been a while since we've had any submersible disasters. We've had submarine disasters. Submarine, anything can happen with the submarine. You bonk into an underground mountain hard enough, your submarine is basically fucked. But with a submersible, it just goes down. You generally know what you're going down into, what the general terrain is. Kind of, what do you see coming out of this OceanGate disaster? Like, what is there? Do you, I understand I'm asking you to predict the future, and who knows what other crazy rich people are going to do, but like, does this kind of give us a like, ooh, maybe we should back off on human exploration here? Should we do more robots? Is there going to be oversight? Because it really seems like the OceanGate CEO was kind of throwing a lot of caution into the wind and saying, yeah, I don't, they told us we can't do this, but we're going to anyway. What's the path forward here?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And but I have hit an undersea cliff in a submersible
Oh, have you?
while I was in it. I got to be honest with you. After all this, the memory is at the time it was kind of funny. In retrospect, not so much. But yeah,
It's
so
funny because you're here on a podcast later talking about it. It
yeah,
wouldn't be funny if you and I never had this conversation because you were fish food,
yeah, no,
obviously.
yeah. For a lot of years, it was a pretty great bar story. You know what I mean? But
Yeah, talk about how bad of a driver you are. You hit an underground mountain.
oh, I wasn't the driver. I was the one shaking the driver's shoulder again and pointing out the portal. But yeah. So I don't know. This is. I think we're going to see something really similar to like the Virgin Galactic disaster, only on a smaller scale. I think that the types of it's been a bit of a trend to put submersibles onto your mega yacht, and a lot of that type of activity has been funding other things, so to speak. So, anytime a billionaire buys a submersible, sometimes that can create like a little mini ecosystem of science and, documentary filmmaking and things like that. But, or at least, fund enough of the innovation into the industry that other people get to benefit.
Right. Again, if there's a place where for billionaires to sink all of their money into the ocean is a perfectly acceptable place. Like,
Yeah.
I would rather this than you get into politics. I say.
Yeah.
Yes.
It has a tendency to turn them into environmentalists too, which I don't hate. But I think that there's going to be a big pause and a lot of reflection, at least until they kind of figure out what happened there. I think that everybody's risk assessment of this just completely changed overnight. I mean, like I said, if you asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have gone. So,
Sure. And I know a lot of people say that that's crazy, but again, this did have, we're seeing a lot of things after the effect, but the French pilot that you mentioned, even James Cameron talked, very highly about that guy's like he knows what he's doing. He's a good friend. He's been doing this for years. This isn't his first time. And again, this thing went down multiple times, and it's easy in hindsight to just be like, well, of course that's dumb. You shouldn't do that. But like, people do it constantly. And for better or worse. So, and this, when do you know when the last like submersible accident was? Like, not necessarily submarines, because that's a government things. Submarines have different jobs and whatnot, but like an actual submersible having a catastrophic failure like this.
Yeah, I'm aware of like three, none of which are anywhere kind of close to this. I think in the 2010s, a Russian researched submersible, something more designed for the continental shelf, got trapped under a cable or something like that, and they were down there for a few days longer than they hoped to be. Everybody was fine. Apparently, the old Pisces program at one point, some people were stuck underwater for a couple days. Then Alvin, the really well known U.S. The Woods Hole submersible. It's apparently it fell off a ship at one point, but some guy managed to he jumped out in time. He was fine, but it was just kind of down there for a few months. They pulled it up and retrofitted it and put it back into service. It's still in service today. You'd have to actually go back a lot further to start to see some of these, like this type of accident happen back into kind of like the like the 1800s, where like the Hunley, for instance, that managed to kill 3 times as many people as could even fit in it at one time because they kept on dragging it up, pumping the water out and putting new people in.
You get the corpses out, you put some fresh ones in, and say go for it. No, fine. Don't worry about that thing floating over there. It's fine. It's not a tow. Go ahead.
Yeah. There was one story. I don't remember the details super well, but I mean, this goes back all the way to like the like the Prussian War or something like that. A guy by the name of William Bauer invented a little submarine to go out and do some damage or spy. I can't remember what the case was. They got stuck on the bottom. He was the only one to realize out of this crew of, I think, 3, that the only way to get out was going to have to be to equalize the pressure so they could open the hatch and swim free. He did not communicate this well to the guys that he was with, giving us the first underwater fistfight in history.
Wait, so he didn't? He's just like, look, we're gonna crack this open and swim on out of here. But everybody else said no, or what? What is?
I'm not. I think he just went for the hatch and started trying to open it. So it's like I think he thought it through, but nobody else. He didn't communicate.
Didn't communicate.
Yeah.
Didn't let everybody else know. Hey, I had this thought in my head. I should put it in my mouth and tell the rest of you. We're going to open this up and swim to the surface.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a lot of the previous, not even tragedies, they're accidents. Like the people, we get them back eventually. Like, oh, it's down there, it's stuck on something, or it loses power, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But we haven't had a catastrophic implosion in a long time.
Nothing like that. Yeah. It's either something that involved like scuba divers in some way or another, and there was a tragedy there, or you have to go back to kind of like the crank era, right? Where it was really the domain of some cranks.
Right. Like, and really technology, anything before World War II is very questionable to me regardless, just because, we did a lot. World War II got us industrialized really, really well in a lot of ways. So if we're talking about like the old deep sea diving bells and stuff like that, like, well, yeah, that stuff collapsed all the time, I'm sure. Like we had no problem just killing people inside of contraptions in the early 1900s.
Oh yeah. The only way to test a lot of this stuff was just you stick a dude in a tank and you see what happens. So
it wasn't until like the 50s and 60s that we realized maybe we could put a monkey in there first, and then a dude, and then we'll just see. It'd be a little bit easier. It's not great for the monkeys, not great, but probably a little bit better of a test than sending 5 dudes down to their death.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Taylor, I want to thank you for coming on. I want to thank you for reaching out to me and wanting to come on and talk about this, because I love experts in things that I can ask them lots and lots of questions about. Definitely very impressed that you worked on the Kursk. That's one of those like shipwrecks that when you read into it, it just gets sadder and sadder. I appreciate you coming on. Do you have anything that you want to plug? Do you want anybody to follow you on Twitter?
You don't
have to.
Yeah, it's always kind of hard to follow some commentary on a tragedy with a here's the books I've written or something like that.
Right.
But I am an author.
Well, Taylor has written books, and you should probably read them. Are they about deep sea diving?
Yeah, a couple of them are about kind of a like a privateer submarine crew, And so if you like kind of like the action adventure genre, the Clive Cussler kind of genre, they sure were a lot of fun to write, and folks seem to enjoy them. And then my most recent book is called The Maw. It's about cave exploration.
Ooh, I do enjoy going into caves, but only the nice show caves that they put a walkway inside of and lights and whatnot.
Yeah, well, hey, if you're a reader, you should let me send you a copy here. So
Yeah, we'll definitely do that and bring you back on to talk about even more submarine disasters, maybe. Taylor, thanks so much for coming on. Everybody, thanks for listening. You can always get more of this on our Patreon, patreon.com/hell of a way to die. We've got the store. We've got all kinds of different things. If you like this, please consider donating. If you like it but don't have money, a 5-star review is always nice on wherever you're getting this from. So I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you next week.